The thing about a job you have buried is that you stop watching the grave. Dez Calloway had stopped watching, which was how a stranger in a clean coat came to be standing in the dock shadow where Dez did business, holding a sealed case and a great deal of patience, saying in the politest voice Dez had heard in years that the client would like the disposal confirmed. Dez did not run, because running is a confession you cannot take back, and Dez had spent a career learning that the people worth fearing are the ones who do not make you run. This one had not raised her voice. She had said confirmed, which was a worse word than delivered or paid or even found out. You do not send someone to confirm a thing you already believe. Months back, a deep-pocketed client had paid Dez a fortune to drop a package into a kept place, past the one boundary in the sector that returns nothing, with Dez's name on the doing of it. Dez had worked out, the way Dez worked out everything, that there was no delivery in it, only disposal, and that the client knew. So Dez had built a falsified, keep-alive telegraph, thrown a dead decoy across the boundary to beat the package's heartbeat to the client's spec, and relayed the heartbeat, then silence as the drop confirmation. The kept place had taken the decoy and returned nothing, the way kept places do, for free. The forged receipt read true. The client, 2 sectors out, had stamped it placed. And Dez had kept the package. It was in a lined cavity behind a welded panel 3 meters from where Dez was standing, a fist of uncategorized inheritance hardware that nobody had a name for, that carried, under its housekeeping layer, where Dez had no business listening and had listened anyway, a faint, slow, regular pulse, a thing that kept time. Dez did not know what it was. Dez had assumed, wrongly, that nobody would ever come asking after a thing they believed was at the bottom of a silence. The fortune from the job had gone where a fixer's fortune goes when there is a working debt waiting back home. Most of it to the debt, the rest into the slow, expensive business of staying bondable, of being the name 3 crews and a dozen fences trusted with the things they could not trust to anyone else. For months, it had been the cleanest money Dez ever took, a job refused without being refused, a thing kept because a thing someone pays a fortune to lose is worth more held than delivered. Dez had even let themselves believe the client was a closed account. That was the error. In the gray economy, there are no closed accounts. There are only quiet ones, and the quiet ones are the ones that come back in a clean coat. The agent gave a name when Dez asked. The way you give a name you have used so long, it might as well be true. Sale. A settlement agent, she said. She confirmed dispositions on the client's behalf. She did not ask what was in the package. She made a point of not asking, which told Dez she already knew it mattered.
You needn't be alarmed. The client is satisfied with the receipt. I am here because the client is the sort who is satisfied and also certain. And those are different conditions. I confirm the second one. It is a courtesy I perform. And then I am gone.
Confirm it how? The thing's a light hour down a hole that doesn't give anything back. You can't go look. Nobody can. That's what you paid for.
Just so. One cannot look into the silence, but one can look everywhere else. A thing that is in the silence is, by definition, a thing that is nowhere a person can reach. So I do not confirm the silence holds it. I confirm that nothing reachable does. The same fact, read from the other side.
That was the whole shape of the trap, laid out in courtesy, and Dez felt it close. Sales verification was a scan. She would sweep the reachable sector, every frequency, every housekeeping band, the deep, stubborn layers a thing announces itself on whether it wants to or not. For the package's signature, if the package's pulse turned up anywhere a person could reach, the drop was faked, the receipt was a lie, and Dez was a fixer whose receipt had been found false, which in the gray economy is not a crime, it is an ending. No one would have to do anything to Dez at all. They would simply stop. If the pulse turned up nowhere reachable, then it was beyond the boundary and the silence gone, verified. It was, Dez thought, the most elegant trap anyone had ever walked them into. And the worst of it was that Dez had built it themselves months back. The moment they decided a forged receipt was the end of a thing, instead of the beginning of one. You cannot refuse a verification you have already been paid to pass. To say no to the sweep was to say the receipt had been a lie, which was the one thing that ends a fixer for good. The only way out was straight through the middle of it, to make the lie true on the single band anyone could actually check.
The sweep takes some hours. I will run it from here. The band reaches the whole reachable volume out to the boundary. You are welcome to stay. People who have nothing to hide usually do. It costs them nothing, and it reassures me, which costs them nothing either.
And if I've got somewhere to be?
Then I would note that you had somewhere to be. I note everything. It is most of what I am.
Dez stayed. Of course, Dez stayed. And under the watch cap, behind the easy hands and the trade rings and the face built to be forgotten, Dez started doing the only thing Dez had ever been good at, which was reading the rules for the one that was actually real. Here was the real one. A kept place returns nothing. Not a ship, not a thrown thing, not a signal on its own legs. Dez had watched the silence eat a decoy and not give back so much as an echo. That was the rule that bit. That was the rule the whole job had been built on. And it cut both ways, if you held it the right way round. Sale could not look into the silence. Nobody could, which meant the only thing standing between Dez and a verified gone confirmation was the package's pulse turning up somewhere reachable. Here in a cavity 3 meters away, faithfully keeping its slow time where any patient sweep would eventually hear it. Dez did not have to get the package into the silence. Dez only had to make it silent. And while Dez was working out how to silence a thing without killing it, the other piece of it landed. The piece that turned Dez's stomach over once and left it cold. The client had never wanted the package destroyed. You do not pay a settlement agent to walk a frontier dock and run a several-hour sweep to confirm that a thing got broken. You break a thing yourself, you watch it break. What the client wanted was for the package to be believed gone. Gone past checking, gone where no one could ever produce it, gone in the one way that could never be disproven. The silence was not a furnace, it was an alibi. The client had a thing that needed to not exist on the record forever, in a way that no court and no rival and no future accounting could ever overturn. And a kept place was the only address in the sector that delivered that. Permanent, unrecoverable, unverifiable. You could not get it back, and that was the point, and you could not check that it was really there. And that was also the point, because checking and recovering are the same act, and the silence refuses both. Dez looked at the welded panel 3 meters off and understood finally what was behind it. Not contraband, not evidence in the small sense. A thing that kept time, that someone with the money to hire Sale needed the universe to agree was gone. Dez still did not know what it was. Dez had stopped caring what it was. Dez had started caring very much that it not end up wherever the client wanted everything like it to end up. So Dez set about making a kept place, a small, dishonest, hand-built one. The package announced itself the way inherited tech announces itself. A low housekeeping signal, plumbing, and I am here running under everything else. The same family of stubborn heartbeat that the smugglers swore could cross a dead zone where real channels died. Dez had learned the trick third hand, the same way Dez learned everything. A story passed around a galley table, a relay tender out on some chain who once bent a buoy's heartbeat into a telegraph to count a stranded runner home. If a housekeeping pulse could be bent, it could be smothered. The thing that bites is also the thing you grip. Dez worked it the way Dez worked everything. Fast, flat, alone, out of parts that came with no paperwork. A gutted, inherited husk, dead in signal quiet, lifted off a scrap rack 2 bays over for the price of not asking. The inert foam of a reach hull breach patch. The cheap blanket every salvage hand kept in a kit. A few stolen hours and the one piece of knowing that mattered. That the makers had built their bones to outlast their organs, so a dead lattice went on eating signal long after it had stopped doing anything else at all. Dez nested the package inside a gutted, dead inherited component, a husk whose own deep lattice ate signal the way the maker's bones always did, and packed the gaps with the inert foam of a reach hull breach patch, The cheap insulator every salvage hand on the frontier kept in a kit. Layer over layer, dead lattice and dead air. A thing built to give nothing back. Not a vault you can open. This was the other thing, a hole that keeps. Dez was building by hand on a workbench in a few stolen hours. A crude mortal copy of the exact behavior the client had paid a fortune to rent from the universe. To hide a thing from people who use the silences, Dez made a little silence of their own. The diagnostic told the story as the shell closed. The pulse, faithful and slow, faded down the bands one by one. Present, fainter, a whisper, and then a flat, dead nothing, where a moment before there had been a heartbeat. Signal silent, not destroyed, kept. Before the last band went, Dez heard the thing one more time, clearer than ever, the way you hear a held breath in a quiet room. And the slow, regular beat was not quite keeping its own time the way it had months ago. The gaps had stretched, just slightly, like a clock running down. Dez, who knew comms folklore and dead zone stories and exactly nothing about what the makers built or why, read it as the component dying and felt a small, dumb grief for a thing keeping its last time in a dock shadow. Dez did not have a word for what it actually was. Somewhere out past the boundary, something the whole inherited network set its clocks by was beating slower, and a fixer on a frontier dock heard a piece of it run down and called it a dying battery, and closed the shell, and that was as close as the universe let either of them come. Sail ran her sweep. Dez sat across the bench and let her, hands easy and visible, a person with nothing to hide. The instrument listened to the whole reachable dark, band by band, hour by hour, for the signature of a fist of inherited hardware that was 3 meters away, wrapped in a hand-built nothing and saying not one word. She talked a little in the long middle of it. Verification by question, Dez realized. Every pleasant thing she said was a small hook trailed in the water to see which way Dez leaned.
You did good work on the receipt, by the way. The telegraph. A heartbeat, stuttered to spec, then silence. Most fixers would have faked a clean confirmation. You fake to death. That is the work of someone who understood the address. I have read a great many drop receipts. Yours is the only one that sounded like grief.
You catch a lot for someone who doesn't ask what's in the box.
I am paid not to ask. It is a different skill than not knowing.
She let a silence sit, the way she let everything sit, and trailed another hook through it.
You went to the boundary yourself for the drop. Few do. Fewer twice.
You don't go twice. Once is plenty to learn it doesn't give anything back.
And it took the package cleanly.
It took what crossed the line, the same as it takes everything, clean as a closed door, and about as talkative.
Every answer Dez gave was true about a decoy and a lie about a package. And the whole trick of it, the only trick Dez had ever really had, was to say the true thing in a voice that did not have to choose which one it meant. That was the knife under all the courtesy, and Dez felt it clearly now. Sale did not need to threaten. If the sweep found the pulse, Sale would not raise a hand. Sale would simply make one quiet call, and the network of trust that was the only thing holding Dez's whole life up. The rings up Dez's ear, every debt settled clean, every crew that took Dez's word, would learn that Dez Calloway's receipts could not be trusted, and then Dez would have nothing. No jobs, no movement, no name. The gray economy does not kill, it excludes. It was, Dez thought, a more honest way to end someone than a blade, because it only used what you had actually done. The sweep ran down to its last bands in the small hours. Sale watched the instrument. Dez watched Sale. The package 3 meters away in its hand-built silence said nothing at all. Dez had run cons that turned on a forged stamp, a bought minute, a face nobody looked at twice. This was the first that turned on nothing at all, on a sound not made, on an absence holding steady where a heartbeat used to be. The hardest lie to catch is the one made of silence because there is nothing in it to take apart. That was the client's whole religion, and tonight, for the length of one sweep, it was Dez's too. The instrument finished. Sale read it and read it again, because she was the sort who read everything twice. Nothing. No signature on any band, anywhere in the reachable volume out to the boundary. She cross-checked it against the old receipt, the months-old telegraph, the stuttered heartbeat, and the silence after, laying the forged death beside the empty sweep, and the two of them agreed because Dez had built them to. A thing whose pulse Dez had faked across the boundary months ago, and whose pulse could now be found nowhere this side of it, was a thing in the silence. There was no other place for a signature to go truly, permanently quiet. The silence was the only answer the universe offered for nowhere reachable, and the silence could not be checked, and that was exactly what made it an answer.
Nothing reachable carries it. By the only logic the address allows, it is past the boundary. The disposition is confirmed.
She said it the way she said everything, level and unhurried, and Dez could not tell, would never be able to tell, whether she believed it or had simply decided that a verification she could not break was a verification she would sign. Maybe those were the same thing, for someone who noted everything and asked only what she already half knew. Maybe Sale had looked at a fixer who faked a death so well it sounded like grief, and at a silence that could never be checked, and chosen, professionally, not to be the one who failed to confirm the unconfirmable. She settled the balance in cash and a barter marker, the way the layer pays, and sealed her case. The job was closed. Dez had survived the bill's first knock by handing a careful, patient, wealthy enemy the one thing she had come for: certainty. Manufactured, hand-built, dishonest certainty, wrapped in dead lattice 3 meters away. But a kept place is unfalsifiable, and a confirmation you cannot break is a confirmation you sign, and Sale signed it. At the edge of the dock shadow, she paused, the way Dez was beginning to understand careful people always paused, to leave the worst thing last and gentle.
A courtesy, fixer, since you did clean work. This was not the client's first disposition, and it will not be the last. There are more of these, small, old, time-keeping things the client needs the universe to agree are gone, and they are going one by one into the silences. You confirmed one. Should another come your way, and it will, the client now knows your hands are good. That is a recommendation, and it is also a leash, and I would not, in your place, be able to tell you which it is more of.
Then she was gone into the brighter dock, unhurried, forgettable in the way only the truly dangerous manage, leaving Dez with a settled balance, a closed job, a recommendation that was also a leash, and the knowledge that somewhere a patient party with deep pockets was feeding small timekeeping things into the silences one by one, and needed the universe to agree they were gone. Dez went back to the cache and opened the shell, just to see the way you check a wound. The pulse came back the moment the dead lattice came off, faint and slow and a little slower than it should be, faithful as ever, keeping its running down time in a fist of hardware nobody had a name for. Dez held it in the work lamp and did not put it back into the world's hearing. A thing a rich, careful party needed the universe to believe was gone. A thing that kept time and was slowly keeping it worse. Dez did not know what it was. Dez knew only that the client had wanted it past all checking, in a silence, forever, and that Dez had instead chosen to hold it in a smaller silence, in a coat lining on a frontier dock, where at least one person knew it still existed. That was the whole of the win, and Dez was honest enough to see how thin it was. The bill was not paid, it was deferred, and the client now knew Dez's hands and rated them, which is the most dangerous thing a careful enemy can decide about you. Dez thought about the rings up their ear. Every one a debt closed clean, the only ledger that had ever counted. And how near they had come tonight to being worth nothing at all, how a single quiet call from a woman in a clean coat could have unwritten the lot. Dez had kept that ledger by building a silence. It was a strange bargain to have struck. The lie that protected the rings was the same lie that, if it were ever heard, would erase them. Dez had tied their whole good name to a thing that could never be checked, which was either the safest vault in the sector or the worst, and there would be, as there never was, no way to know which until it was far too late to matter. Dez had not beaten the silence. Dez had borrowed its one trick, that it gives nothing back so no one can ever check it, and used it to keep, instead of lose, the exact thing it was built to swallow. Dez tucked the package back into its dead lattice shell and the shell into the coat, where the world could not hear it, and stood a while at the viewport over the docks. Out past the running lights and the freight traffic, far off where the charts went vague, there was a region of sky with no relay lights in it at all, a dark that the boys bent around, that the smugglers swore kept whatever crossed into it. The client was feeding small, slow-ticking things into places like that, one by one, and needed the dark to agree they were gone. The dark was very good at agreeing. It agreed with everything by saying nothing, which was the only reason any of this had worked. Dez had spent a career sorting the rules that bite from the rules that are only paperwork. The silence keeps what enters it. That one had always been real. Tonight Dez had learned the second half of it, the half the client lived by and the half Dez would live by now. The silence keeps what enters it, and it never tells you what. You can hide a thing in a silence. You can also hide a thing in the idea of one. And nobody, not a settlement agent with an expensive case, not a client with a fortune, not the makers themselves if they ever came back to count. Nobody can ever make a silence give up whether it is keeping anything at all. Dez patted the coat once, over the pocket where a small, dead quiet weight kept its slow worst time, and went to find a darker bar than usual, and did not look back at the part of the sky that keeps things.